Good morning, and welcome to this morning's session on globalization and fragmentation. My name is Alan Katz. I'm the Paris bureau chief for Bloomberg News. For the last several decades, globalization has powered the world economy. After the end of the Cold War, what really accelerated was the economic integration of big countries. What made sense for businesses from a cost, efficiency, and profit standpoint was generally also supported by governments when it came to developing long, complicated supply chains around the world. The idea was that the more countries worked together, the more their economies were linked, the more likely they were to be at peace with each other, and therefore that was good for the world. We do not appear to be on that path anymore. Instead, there's a rethinking of globalization and to some extent a regionalization, though there might be some dissension from that on this panel. But that is quite a big change. It didn't happen overnight. Many of the origins of this move stem from the fallout from the 2008 financial crisis. That was followed, of course, by Brexit in 2016 and by a ramp-up of trade tensions between China and the United States. We've seen a global pandemic that has tested those global supply chains and led many countries to rethink the offshoring of their production. Perhaps the moment that has most crystallized this change was Russia's attack on the Ukraine in 2022. At the United Nations, there were a series of votes about whether to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Roughly two-thirds of the global economy, led by the United States, voted to condemn Russia, but the remaining third either abstained or rejected any condemnation. As a result, we're seeing billions of dollars of investment in new factories that is now being guided by geopolitics rather than simply by economics. In 2022, we had $1.2 trillion in foreign direct investment in the world, and we saw $180 billion of that shift from the bloc that refused to condemn Russia to the bloc that did condemn Russia's invasion. In a worst-case scenario, the International Monetary Fund that if you had a severe fracturing of the global trade system, you would eliminate 7% of global GDP. That's equivalent to wiping out the entire French and German economies combined. China remains, of course, the world's factory. It offers scale that no one else does, and yet sentiment in some Western countries towards investing there has turned quite negative, and that's created a new dynamic. There is a group of economies that are navigating the middle of this geopolitical divide, and you can call them the connector economies. They're attracting factories from the US, factories from China. These are often located near each other or sometimes in the same business park. These countries are importing from China to sell to the West or vice versa, and they can take advantage of their neutrality to get benefits from both sides. In northern Vietnam, for example, you can drive an hour from the Chinese border into what was recently a farm field with water buffaloes, and you'll see big factories going up. Over the last 5 years, exports from Vietnam to the United States have doubled. At the same time, imports from China into Vietnam have doubled as well. Places like Poland are now getting huge investment from China and South Korea and US chip makers as they set themselves up as a link between Europe and the rest of the world. We're seeing places like Indonesia, which has vast natural resources, bring together companies like Ford, the US automaker, Chinese companies, and Brazilian miners to exploit nickel to sell into China or to sell into the United States. Mexico is also well placed to cash in on this so-called fragmentation. Sitting right next to the US border is a textbook example of what we call nearshoring. But Mexico is also attracting a lot of Chinese investment, and that's why it's able to straddle both sides of this divide. So the questions before us include how we manage this supposed fragmentation, what kind of institutions we might want or need to tackle this more disparate landscape, and who will win or lose from these changes. So to speak about this, we have with us this morning Angel Gurria, President of the Paris Peace Forum and the former Secretary General of the OECD, Maria Fernanda Garza, Chairwoman of the International Chamber of Commerce, Norbert Röttgen, a member of the Committee of Foreign Affairs from the Bundestag from the Federal Republic of Germany, Miao Lu, co-founder and Secretary General for the Center for China and Globalization, and Famke Krummuller, Ernst & Young's, or EY's, leader for EMEA for the Geostrategic Business Group. Thank you all very much for joining us. So my first question for Mr. Gurria, I'll just go in order that we have it. Mr. Gurria, according to you, what is the key driver that's causing this political and economic fragmentation, and what is the main priority we should be addressing as we try to shape the global future of the economy?
Well, there are political reasons, real reasons. There is fragmentation of political parties. There is appearance of factions or fractions within political parties. So there is fragmentation in the political sense. And therefore, more issues to be resolved, more issues to be addressed. But I would say that the fragmentation story and the deglobalization story is very much exaggerated. I think the globalization story and this fragmentation story has been very much inflated, in that what is happening is by, well, in a way, force of nature, but there are also some reasons that are affecting the logic, I would say, with which trade is being conducted. And that is that, for example, the politics of big oil companies, their influence, the politics of pharmaceutical companies, the politics of agricultural powers, you know, the big firms, et cetera, the genetically engineered seeds and the influence and the consequences thereof, et cetera. So I think those distort trade a lot more than so-called fragmentation or deglobalization. And I'm expecting from the chairwoman of the ICC to let us know a little bit more of that. But I would say it is true that I think logic is taking over, in a sense, by saying, okay, who is closer to the main market of the world, which is the United States? Well, isn't it Mexico? And does Mexico offer, you know, a better chance because all you have to do is push the cart across the border? I say, yes. So it makes a lot of sense for businesses to install in Mexico. Also, I think China has lost its competitive edge in terms of labor costs. And more countries are competing with China on the labor productivity and labor issues, labor costs. And therefore, what I believe is that cost structures and the business logic is taking over the process. So I would say gross exaggeration, yes. When it comes to deglobalization, globalization will continue on and on and on and on, because technology, you can't stop it, because communications, you can't stop it. But I think, as I said before, that some of the business logic is taking over.
Thank you. So, Ms. Garza, the ICC calls itself the voice of world business, championing the global economy as a force for economic growth, job creation, and prosperity. I guess first, do you agree that fragmentation is overblown, or if there is rising tension or fragmentation or deglobalization, how do you see that playing out?
Well, thank you, Alan. There's definitely a plausible cause to say that the trade shifts that we have been seeing since the COVID-19 pandemic may ultimately deliver a more resilient global value chain. We were just talking about how geographical concentration in supply is clearly a source of fragility. And what companies are doing are de-risking their operations. And this whole fragmentation of the global trading system, if continues, will come at enormous cost for everyone, not just for business, for workers, for consumers, for families, at the end, for people. So there might be a small number of winners, of companies that, as usually, gain from nationalistic approach and this decoupling. But at the very end, we will all as humanity will be much worse. The International Monetary Fund has estimated that the global cost of the output of this geo-economic fragmentation could be up to 7% of the global economy. That is taking out of the economy of the world France and Germany's whole economy. And it is the same, double the losses of the global financial crisis. And if we add to that the technological decoupling, that same modeling suggests that it could go up to 12%. That is 3 times the financial crisis. So, unfortunately, this can only be the tip of the iceberg, because cooperation in trade is ultimately the bellwether of international communities' ability to jointly solve our cross-border challenges. So indeed, yes, the International Chamber of Commerce was founded on the belief, something that it still holds true today, that trade between sovereign nations is an essential prerequisite for peaceful and effective international cooperation.
Thank you. So Mr. Röttgen, from our conversations we had before coming on stage, I think you're going to disagree with some of the worst-case scenarios that Ms. Garza brought up. So what's your view? Is this fragmentation overblown, or do you worry about some of the same issues that Ms. Garza does?
Both, I would say. So the question whether there is a fragmentation, regionalization, near and friendshoring happening or not, I think it's not a matter of an opinion, but it has to be shown in the statistics and in the numbers. And given the numbers, it's not happening. Of course, we have problems, and there are tendencies. We have there is more protectionism than before. We have higher and new trade tariffs. We have a ban on critical raw materials and technologies. So this is happening, but the basic fact remains that everybody is dependent on everybody. So there is a mutual benefiting from the system. Nobody can afford to be to have a policy without trade and exchange, even between the United States and China. There's a high degree of trade which they are doing. What we have seen as a result of different developments, among them COVID and others, that we have a stagnation of trade. We have more bilateral trade agreements instead of multilateral trade agreements. So there is something happening. What is, apart from COVID and others, the defining conflict that has a significant impact also on the world economy and on trade is the defining conflict of our time, and this is the geopolitical systemic rivalry between China and the West. So this means that this conflict about the international power architecture, about what is the leading defining idea of international relations, rules-based or power-based. This means that economic statecraft, applying economic instruments and tools in order to achieve political goals, to contain the adversary or to hamper its economic development. This is what is characterizing international relations, and as a consequence, it's also characterizing the field of geoeconomics. And of course, this comes at a cost for international trade. But however, I think this is a situation we are in, and we are quite likely to stay in, that everybody knows globalization is there to stay, but but we are entering and have entered a new era of globalization, and we have got rid of the naivety that openness is only good for everybody. Openness also may mean, in the time of geopolitical rivalry, vulnerability. And if a conflict about China were to occur, this would lead to a major a collapse of the world economy and would have significant impact. And of course, dependencies, over investments would be exploited. And so we have to prepare for political conflict and to reduce dependencies and make our economies safer and less dependent, less vulnerable to the political adversary. So this is happening, and I think we have to adjust and to adapt to this rivalry, which is characterizing everything: institutions, trade, security, perhaps allowing regional conflicts and wars to occur, and so on.
Thank you. So Ms. Miao, to take that same question, but from a Chinese perspective, or from a Beijing perspective, since that's where you're based, how do you see navigating this more regionalized world, or this more fragmented world? Or, again, do you believe it's actually there's more of a geopolitical dispute or tension going on that hasn't quite affected the trade world as yet?
Thank you for having me. It's my great privilege to share my views at the Paris Peace Forum, which is very innovative and inclusive platform for global governance, especially at this urgent moment for the fragmentation of the globalization. Let's review a little bit. Yes, economic globalization played a significant role for the global prosperity and the economic development since the conclusion of the Second World War. We know that the world economy has tripled in size. However, unfortunately, the uneven distribution of the benefits of globalization, especially in some of the developed countries, the middle class, their income has not been improved for a long time. Sometimes the economic globalization blamed as the scapegoat of that uneven distribution. Plus, additionally, like the geopolitical tensions between US and China, the conflicts happening in Middle East and the Ukraine war, all of those factors lead to the kind of globalization sentiments around the world and lead to the nationalism, the protectionism, and the national security narrative everywhere. That has, like including the WTO, those international institutions has not been so effective like it used to be. And all of the factors already made a lot of negative practice and policies to erode international trust and damage the economic confidence, all of those poison on the global economic landscape. So if you ask me what's the therapy from Chinese perspective to the economic globalization, I think the new form of globalization should emphasize the narrative of the economic mechanism rather than the geopolitical and the military nationalism and the military globalization. And I echo with Professor Graham Allison, who speaks at the Munich Security Conference this February on CCG's event. The cooperation holds the equal, even more importance than competition. But among the international narrative right now, there are much more competition than cooperation. Of course, we need competition and cooperation, but we have to realize that non-cooperation means non-cooperation poses biggest risk. Non-development itself is the greatest insecurity. So at this urgent moment, maybe we can have more infrastructure building, have more the multilateral development banks working together. Yesterday on this stage, some multilateral development banks leaders, including President Macron, call for we put more resources, especially the financial resources, to the global south to address those common challenges like climate change, the poverty alleviation, and the digital gapping widening. So I also propose another therapy for globalization is that I really admire the OECD's minimum tax rate. We should conduct implementation soon. And it already gained more than 100 countries' recognition. So the swift implementation is good for the unequitable, inclusive greener, sustainable globalization. So from Chinese perspective, I think we need to pay more attention on the economic globalization itself, much more the competition and the military alliances building and the ideological alliances building.
Thank you. So Ms. Krummuller, actually, so then from a question of if you are, for all of the questions of protectionism, of competition versus cooperation, and sort of the geopolitical tensions that have risen, how are businesses supposed to respond to this? What kind of preparations do they need to make to face these issues today?
Yeah, so I think we're discussing whether this is happening, not happening, etc. Part of it is, of course, because businesses are still trying to deal with this new environment, think through how they can operate in something that is entirely new. So I don't think it's necessarily super relevant to discuss whether fragmentation is already happening or not. What I would argue is certainly already happening is the degree of interventionism that we see from governments and rise in economic security policies, number of trade interventionisms, we've heard it, have gone up. The Global Trade Alert says by more than 180% in 5 years, and 4 times more harmful trade interventions than liberalizing. These are facts, so that's impacting the way that businesses operate in this world, and they need to prepare for this new environment. So it's new that we have so much export controls. It's new that we have inbound and now maybe even outbound investment screening, etc. So I think the 2 things that businesses need to think about is, first of all, and as we've heard it from Mr. Röttgen, we are already now, or we are entering a new era of globalization. Unclear what exactly it's going to look like, but it's going to be different from the world from which we're coming, which we've seen for decades, meaning that the majority of businesses have developed their business models on this world. And now it doesn't mean that these business models need to go out of the window, but obviously they need to be rethought. And this new environment needs to be taken into account. So that's already a really big first point. And we know that for sure. And then I think the second important point is that we are entering an era where the nature of geopolitical relations between countries will matter so much more to how businesses operate. In the past, where we were moving towards more globalization, more integration, more liberalization, it was about, you know, where do I put my supply chain because it's efficient, because from an operational perspective it makes sense, et cetera, et cetera. It was a cost efficiency logic. Going forward, arguably the most important thing that businesses need to take into account is what is the geopolitical relationship like between the country in which I'm headquartered or where my brand is from or whatever, and the country in which I operate. And if you don't do that, your entire cost efficiency might not matter anymore. So these 2 things are very new for business, and I think that's where the big challenge is coming from that perspective.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask a few sort of follow-up questions. It'll be to the whole panel. I'm not sure we're going to have time to take questions from the audience, but we will try if we have a few minutes at the end. But I guess, first of all, you mentioned trade restrictions. The other side to that is essentially trade attraction. One of the things that I've been curious about is the effect of subsidies and geographical limitations that have come back into vogue. As we were discussing earlier, you know, the U.S. put in the Inflation Reduction Act that had an immediate effect on the desire of non-U.S. companies to suddenly start building factories, doing capital investment in the United States or in North America more broadly, which is because there was a geographic requirement in order to benefit from it. They had to be in North America, Canada, the U.S., or Mexico. From your perspective, and to all 5 of you, do you think that is the way forward? Is everyone going to be doing this, and that's where the competition will be? That's where, if there is fragmentation and globalization, that's how it's going to happen? Or do you think it'll be more on the restrictive side, on the export control, export screening that Ms. Krummuller mentioned?
I think that you're going to have more and more integration in the case of North America. It's going to be more of a factory, Canada and the United States and Mexico, where everybody will contribute in different ways. And it's going to be increasingly competitive as a region, not as one country rather than the other, but as a region. It's going to be increasingly more competitive and, I would say, embrace green. Embrace green. It is going to be also a greener way of producing.
Thank you, Alan. And I think that something that's been very clear is that trade is a broader force for good in the world. And as business, I believe that we have the duty and the moral imperative to make this case. And this must start with a concentrated effort of defense, and most important of all, to reinvigorate, to reinvent the World Trading Organization system that we have today. It is extraordinarily worrying, you were mentioning it, the new trade barriers that have been introduced annually have nearly tripled since 2019, up to almost 3,000 last year. And this is no small part, and we believe that this is due to the WTO's dispute settlement system that's being tipped into the freeze since the Trump administration. And unfortunately, the US had a change of administration in 2021, but things have not changed. So in short, as business, we must wake up to the central importance of the WTO governing global trade. And this is a broader strategic value. It is a foundation for stronger economic cooperation. The ICC will be publishing a major report in the following weeks that is called How to Fix the WTO. And it will set up a comprehensive and holistic reform pathway to make the multilateral trading system fit for purpose in the 21st century. And it will also provide a basis to reverse growing fragmentation. So I would like to encourage all of you to join us in this. Thank you. Of course.
So this is not on my list of questions asked, but since you brought it up, so can I have a show of hands? Who thinks the WTO can be fixed? Right? Again, I haven't seen your paper yet, but I will read it with great interest. But I mean, I have to admit my doubts about whether there's any political will on the part of particularly the United States to ever be willing to go through really trade dispute resolution at the WTO. Who, even from the audience, who thinks the WTO can be fixed? No? Yeah? That's, it's not nobody. It's a little bit less than half.
You have to wait until they read the paper.
Yeah, we'll have to read the paper. Exactly. But
a distinct minority.
Ms. Miao, you raised your hand enthusiastically. You believe in the future of the WTO?
Yes, of course. And actually, WTO used to be the anchor of the international trade system since the Second World War. And it played a significant role. We should fix it. We have to fix it. As the only one anchor of the international trade system, it worked very well, but right now the distributed sentiment mechanism are almost paralyzed due to the geopolitical issues. Everyone knows that. But I would like to add one more point, is that maybe the regional agreement, trade agreements are rising, including CPTPP, RCEP, and the DEPA, of course, including IPEF, US proposed. All of this, actually, we cherish those platforms. Those platforms can encourage the economic globalization and stimulate the global trade and creating the international mutually beneficial, like you said, mutually benefit trade system to the world. All of this are the economic globalization. Actually, we can mix the regional one and the WTO fix both. It can work together.
Great, thank you. And so, speaking of that, one of the issues with the WTO has been sort of the U.S. attitude towards it. One of the reasons that the U.S. is so both important but also disruptive to global trade is that most global trade happens in U.S. dollars. People have been talking about the end of dollar dominance in trade for as long as I can remember. But do you see any tangible move away from dollars, whether it's toward the yuan, towards other currencies? And would that help? Would that hurt in terms of whether it's whether it would cause this fragmentation that we have some debate about whether or not it exists, or would there be some benefit to it? Yes.
No way No way, Jose. It's going to be the dollar will remain the prime currency in the world because it's practical, because it's already used, and because it works. Because it works. So it will continue to be.
If I can just offer some, I mean, I agree that in the short term, it is also just unrealistic to find a substitute as a reserve currency, but the share of US dollar as a reserve currency in central bank has dropped to less than 60% in 2020 and has remained at that low level since then. It's the lowest level in 25 years. So that's a fact. And you probably know more about this than I do, but China does a majority of its trade not in US dollar. So I think there is a clear tendency to try and not be dependent on the dollar anymore, also because obviously it's a tool for sanctions implementation. It has extraterritorial effect. It allows the US to have extraterritorial effect, but a lot of things that they do. So while in the short term there is no credible alternative, I think there is a clear tendency.
Yep, may I? Yep.
Thank you.
Okay.
Not just on this aspect, in every aspect, to solve the huge challenges we have today, we need to open our mind to different ways of thinking, and that includes our economic system.
Yes, dollar works, but dollar already being weaponized. We have to accept that reality is that right now, see, the BRICS enlargement so quick. Why? The global south, the dissatisfaction full of their communities. The payment is the issue. So right now, I know some goods, shipping and the trade happening among the global south already without dollar. It's of course, like President said, it's a reality right now, but the world needs renew globalization. Today's topic is therapy of new shaping globalization. So I think payment is the issue.
And so, well, one, actually, I did want to try to take some time for some questions from the audience before I have my final question. So if you do have some, please raise your hand. And do we need to give someone, I guess I will give you the microphone since we seem to have no one else. So 1 second, I'll come to you first, and then I'll go to you.
Hello, my name's Eileen and I'm a student at Sciences Po. I was thinking, you briefly now mentioned the BRICS, and I was thinking, what role do you think the BRICS will play within global trade in the next 10 years or so? Thank you.
For any of you.
I think the fact that the BRICS has expanded so quickly shows that a couple of things. First of all, that the West, if I can call it like that, is being challenged, that there's alternative fora that are emerging. You talked about more regional trade agreements, etc. So it is the Global South, which is, of course, a very big group, but part of the Global South trying to get organized. And I think as such, that's therefore a very important development that needs to be followed quite closely. At the same time, it is a very diverse group with very diverse agenda. So whether they will be able in the short term to agree on an agenda that actually has a longer lasting impact, I think that will be challenging too. But the move as such points into the direction of obviously these countries trying to get organized in a better way and counterbalance the West.
Mr. Watkin.
Yes, I would not overestimate neither BRICS nor the enlargement of BRICS, because you have to see if this is a group where China and India are both in, so the two big rivals of an entire region, a group where it's Saudi Arabia and Iran are members, so the two big rivals of a region. So I think the ambition will remain extremely limited, and not only the ambition, even the ability to be a countermodel to anything else, of course, will remain limited. What is so? And secondly, I would say the Global South does not exist. It's an umbrella term for a huge group of countries. And the emergence of the language of Global South is also a consequence of the geopolitical rivalry between the United States and China, which has given space for maneuver for a lot of countries who have become much more important, because when you have such a rivalry, there is one sentence of geopolitics: such a rivalry is won by the party who has more friends and allies. And the many countries comprised in the term of the Global South, they have, of course, learned the lesson from this, that they have become more important, and they are not inclined to join a camp. So they want to preserve and extend their maneuver, their space of maneuver, and so it makes sense for them to pursue their interests by joining the BRICS with the limited effects, but by staying very close when it comes to security guarantees, like, for example, Saudi Arabia and other countries. So I think this is a new grouping as a consequence of the geopolitical rivalry. And of course, it's important. It reflects a new power architecture which is emerging, but it has limitations.
Okay, thank you. Did you have a question too, Noodle?
Hi. Thank you so much for your insights. My name is Zahir. I'm from Bangladesh. So first, if anyone would like to invest in Bangladesh, now is the best time. But my question was actually, as countries that want to grow, especially through exports, these trends of decoupling, nearshoring have a lot of implications for us and for our growth. So how do you think rising countries like, say, Bangladesh and Vietnam can actually attract investments, not only from the West, but also from the East? What do you think we're missing? Thank you.
Ms. Biao?
Bangladesh from Global South. We're sure, right? So we should listen to the voice from Global South, like Bangladesh and other countries. China initiated BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. In the past 10 years, already invested more than 1 trillion into more than 3,000 projects along BRI country, including Bangladesh. So, of course, BRI stimulated other similar infrastructure projects, including US lead the Build Back Better World, B3W, and the EU lead the Global Gateway. I think all of those are very good for the eco-globalization, good for the Global South and Global North. We should balance them. Of course, like in the BRICS, they are rivalry, so-called rivalry countries. But why they get together and expand so quick? I think there's a reason is that they are unhappy about the current system. Unipolar world is gone. Multipolar world is here, is reality. We should seek the mechanisms and the narrative to support it. Maybe BRICS, let's try, and BRI, let's try, Global Gateway, B3W, all of those narratives on economic globalization, let's try together. Don't just focus on national security and those kind of military globalization. So I think the question maybe give us a kind of feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think Bangladesh is an extraordinary example of what can be achieved in just 30 years, one generation, when you have cooperation from the private sector, the public sector, the whole society. They are now, the challenge they have right now ahead of them. I was in Bangladesh 3 weeks ago, and it is that they are becoming victims of their own success. Now, in 2 years, they're going to become a middle-income country, which is amazing, as I said, in 30 years to get there. So, and they are, what I heard from them when I was there is the same thing that I hear from our members, 70% of our members that are in the Global South. ICC is present in 170 countries. So, and it is, you cannot ask us to choose sides. And Bangladesh is in between China and India, in between Russia and the United States. And it is the same thing all around the world. They have their own challenges, their own agenda, and by taking sides, it only gets more and more complicated.
There are opportunities. Sorry.
I was just going to pick up actually on something that you just said around public-private cooperation. I think that's one aspect that we haven't discussed yet, which I think is probably key to the future, is to just make sure, and this is very basic, but to just make sure that government and policymakers speak to business and vice versa, and that they understand each other. And I think right now, still, unfortunately, a lot of the time, they tend to look at each other and look at each other, see each other maybe as not necessarily working together. And if they just understand each other and look into the same direction, trying to achieve the same thing, so businesses understanding that governments are trying to achieve national security, economic security, etc., government understanding what business can contribute, that without innovation, investment, private money, a lot of the things are not possible, the energy transition is not possible, etc. I think that is just, I just really wanted to make that point of very basic but very important. I think that we need to really work on that.
And I would like to briefly underline the opportunities for countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh for two reasons. The one is countries like Germany, highly internationally exposed, we have to reduce our dependencies, and an instrument to reduce dependencies is diversification. And countries like Vietnam and Bangladesh and others getting more and more attractive as destinations of German foreign investments. And the other point is more general. This competition we have been talking about, I think has brought, hopefully, Western arrogance and ignorance to the countries which are called the Global South to an end. We can't afford being so ignorant and arrogant and just ignore these countries, but we have to be more focused and pay more attention. And this is a general mood which is shifting towards these countries, and this creates opportunities.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I'll come to one last question that I have for each one of the panelists. So if in 45 seconds you can answer the following question. Next Wednesday, Presidents Xi and Biden are set to meet for the first time in a year at the APEC meeting in San Francisco. If you're advising them on trade, what would you say to them?
Well, not exclusively on trade, but I would say stop betting on Putin, because Putin is a pariah and will increasingly become a pariah, and therefore it's not a good bet. And for President Biden, I would say there are some countries, especially two, that are too big to fail. And one of them is China. So don't try so hard to make China fail. Maybe work more cooperatively with them.
I will suggest to consider the potential contribution of the private sector to strengthening global governance, not just on financing, but there are many, many other arenas where the private sector can collaborate to address the challenges.
Mr. Rucker.
I would say there is no way to ignore and come around the fact that this is a historic rivalry and both sides have embraced this path. However, I would say there is an opportunity, and this would be my advice, that including the area of trade, there is a mutual interest to preserve a modicum, a minimum of trust and communication and back channels. And if even that were preserved or rebuilt, this would be for the benefit for the entire world.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Biao?
I really looking forward to the bilateral heads meeting. It's really very important for the world. I call for both leaders take care about the international responsibility, not just a bilateral relationship, to manage it, stabilize the relationship. It's good for the globalization, for the world. We should consider the global south, the other developed countries. It has been damaged by the US-China conflict, geopolitical tensions. Don't push the other countries take side. It's very hard for them. So take the international responsibility, stabilizing the relationship, and especially the trade we should remember that the tariff imposed on China, kicked by U.S. Maybe we call for, through this process, through those meetings, release a little bit the trade tariff good for the global supply chain. And I just get back from the China International Import Expo, the AMD, the Micron, Qualcomm, all of them built a big booth in the CIIE. It means they got back to China. So I think the tariff, we are waiting for, it should be relieved. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Krumila.
Nothing very different from what has been said, and what I said before about government and business, but talk to each other, try and understand each other, and then try and work together, taking each other's points of views and priorities into account.
Great, super. Well, listen, thank you very much, all of you, for your time. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. We'll hopefully have more time to discuss all the advances we've made in avoiding fragmentation next year when we see each other again. But thank you very much, and I wish you a good rest of your conference.